Hello, Dane. I thought I would go over my perception of what creates chemistry or flow between two people. Now, this is most relevant and important in a romantic relationship, but to some extent, these things relate or kind of apply to all people in relationship. So let's look at some of these things, because one of the things that you've been, or at least I've been upset with, is the way good iterative design in relationship often leads to disconnect. And to give you an example of that, a decade or so ago, a few women made a comment as we were separating the relationship that I wish I had known that before, right? So the designer in me said, okay, how would we make that happen, right? So women, when things don't work out, wish they had known what wouldn't work out ahead of time, presumably so that they could do something about it and not end the relationship. So I thought, well, that's pretty easy. You just have to take time at the beginning of the relationship to communicate useful things. And so I wrote this book, and in it suggested that everyone, at least to some extent, write what I would call a human user's manual. Toasters come with a user's manual. It's not that hard to press a button down and toast pops up, 5 minutes later. If a toaster needs a manual or people get it wrong, human beings are literally 1,000 times more complex than a toaster. So why don't humans come with a manual, right? So it wasn't that hard. It took about a month to write this book. And it's a brilliant manual. Some women want to know about astrology. It's all in here. Some women want to know about deal breakers. It's all in there. Dietary preferences, a little bit of biographical context, sexual preferences, you name it, right? It's in here, broken down by chapters so that you can just, skim in and instantly see, let's look at some of the chapters here. So meta conversation, more information, the basics of connecting. These are just broad, ways the book is broken down. And we've got, weaknesses, strengths, habits, problems that have come up in relationships. So it's by far the best human manual that I've come across. It's just that the women who wanted to know what they didn't ask about and didn't make time to know before don't have time, they say, to read the book. In other words, the women that complain that they don't know what they never asked about, in turn complain that they don't have enough time to read a book. They have time to have long, complicated projections and misunderstandings. They just don't have time to actually preempt those misunderstandings and projections. They have time to have fights and linger in, wondering what's going to happen next, but they don't have time to co-create something on the basis of data, right? So this is, of course, disappointing, right? It means that women want to not ask questions, want to avoid the time it would take to communicate that, want to avoid reading a book like this, and want things to magically work out as if they had, and then want to blame and complain when they don't know what they obscure and block and don't take the time to find out, right? So that's obviously disappointing. And that would be an example of, right? And so then, so for a while, I filtered people by who would take the time to actually learn enough information so that they wouldn't then turn around and complain that they wish they had known this in advance, as if somehow a mysterious force was obscuring that knowledge. Well, this eliminated 90% of women, right? So it's a better design. The very few women that took the time to learn what they didn't know that they didn't know turned into, great successes. But 90% of women, there have been instances when naked women waiting for sex on the floor get up and put their clothes back on when I say, hey, let's take the time to learn some of the things you may want to know, right, before you jump into bed based on a series of assumptions and projections, right? And they get up and say, I don't actually want to know the difference between my projections, assumptions, and who you are, right? I just wanted to have sex with a fantasy. And, right, well, who knew? But that's, that's, I would say more women than not don't want to know what they don't know that they don't know, and don't want to take the time to learn, and just find the whole thing a little bit uncomfortable. And so, this is frustrating, right? When you create a better model that works better, and then people reject you precisely because you ask them to step into this model that works better for their benefit, right? But then they don't want to do it, right? So that's disappointing. So this may help you understand why this is happening, right? So a couple of things to understand about chemistry, because chemistry is flow. Now, you can look at flow. You can think of a Safeway loading dock, right? So there's the dock, right? And a semi backs up to it, and it's at the right height and the right width. And then large amounts of energy is transferred from the truck to the loading dock, and then from there into the store. So this has chemistry, it has flow. Now, if a pickup truck backs up there, it's not at the right height, and very little can move back and forth. And if a hatchback, it's even less, right? And so flow is about compatibility. Now, all compatibility is in the area of form. You can think of a Windows software program and a Windows computer or PC. Now, Windows is a crappy program, generally has been from day one. But if you load a better program than Windows on a PC, it doesn't load, right? It doesn't connect. So it's actually the first thing to understand about chemistry or flow is it's not about which way is better. Meaning flow happens when there's compatibility, when they fit, not when there's anything good to flow, right? In other words, you may have terrific chemistry between a victim and an abuser that are perfectly fitting, right? The abuser's looking for someone to abuse, the victim is looking for someone to abuse them. They may or may not be aware of that fact, right? But they fit perfectly, and there's an easy, spontaneous flow of energy. Feels very familiar of the family, very comfortable, right? Happens with little effort, just like that Safeway truck, right? The Safeway truck could be filled with junk food, right? Sugars, chemically laden preservative food, prepackaged refined food, right? It's going to make you sick. It doesn't matter. There's flow, right? So flow is independent of the quality of what is flowing, right? So, you have a low quality computer program, Windows. As long as the computer is built for that program and will boot, you will get much better flow than trying to load a Mac operating system, an Apple operating system, which is better built onto a PC, right? It doesn't connect. So that's the first thing to understand. As you build better models for connecting, meaning more intelligent, more efficient models, right? You accurately predicted that if certain key bits of information were honestly communicated before sex, that a tremendous amount of unnecessary suffering would be diminished, right? Suffering would go down. And that the amount of time it would take to transfer that information was much lower than the amount of time to recover from the suffering or to deal with the suffering and misunderstanding, right? So that's a better design, right? But it doesn't have a port in most people, meaning people have not prepared for a better design. And so when you show up ready to load the design, right? The typical person is like, well, I don't know what to do with that, right? And that is typically the reaction. So that's the first thing to understand. And you can think of that as the network effect, right? Windows has the biggest network, but a crappy protocol. And Apple has the best software of those two, but the smaller network, right? And you can take that to extremes. Like there are areas in relationship where you have developed a network of one. You've figured out a better protocol for engaging, and you're the only one practicing it, right? And so there's nowhere to plug that in. Right. And that's just the way that is, right? So you've connected well with older people, usually over age 50, who've been around the block enough to have banged in and crashed their ego enough times to be interested in a better operating system, right? They know how it works. You bang into things in the dark, you get traumatized, and one person leaves and blames it. It's a crappy setup, right? And so they're interested in learning a new model, and they've got a little bit of time on their hands, perhaps. They've learned their life skills so they can have time to learn. Because you may say that, in the computer analogy, you may say you just got to get rid of this PC and learn to use Apple. But when someone is young and barely staying above water and, doesn't have enough time and isn't smart enough to know what's gained and the huge cost of an inefficient system, they can't deal with it, right? But someone with a little bit more time can take the time to learn a new system. So the first thing is, flow is determined by the network. It's not determined by how intelligent the design is. Now, the other thing to understand is that the fear of the unknown is charged, that's a plus 10 charge, right? Now, down here you may have, desire for love and success, but that's often like a plus 5, right? If you really look at how hard people are working on a daily basis to succeed or create love, the majority of the population is doing, less than an hour a day of innovative education and research in either of those areas, right? You can ask 100 random people, and many of them didn't learn a single useful thing to do differently in the entire week, let alone that hour or that day, right? So you ask them, do you want to succeed? Oh, yes. Enough to spend any time learning about it? So so the fear of the unknown is high in 99% of the population. It's the greatest human fear. The desire for a more beautiful world, the devotion to that desire is relatively low, right? There's less than 20% of the population that are true devotees to that, right? And many of them are going about it in different ways, right? Maybe following the cultural myth that if you get enough money, you'll be successful, or if you get enough money, you'll be happy, and love will just magically take care of itself. So that's an important thing to understand, is that it's a small minority of people that are actually devoted to the science of excellence. And then it's also important to understand that most of those people tend to belong to networks, right? So you'll find maybe the David Data crowd that, they're part of that network. And if you talk that language and do, the dominant themes that they're interested, but if you talk about something different, they don't want to think about something new. They want to be part of that network, right? Or the ask for your 100% network, or the law of gratitude, and they want to find someone in their little paradigm, right? And the paradigms that are most successful in the cult or culture are simple paradigms, like the 7 habits of highly effective people. Why not the 100 habits, right? Or really only 7? Well, that's too many to remember, right? So let's have 7 habits, or the 4 agreements. How about 20 agreements, right? No, I want something nice and simple, right? The 4 agreements. It all comes down to that, or just the one, like be positive, whatever it is, be positive. About what? Your daughter being raped? About the fact that you've been being positive for some time and are slipping backwards in key metrics, right? Your debt is going up, your income, purchasing power after interest rate is going down. But that there's a silver lining to that. There's a purpose, a greater plan, right? That's on the other side. If we just get the credit card debt high, what is it we're being positive about, right? So there are very simple metrics. So that's a key thing. Now, as you take people into the unknown and away from simple answers, you're going to meet high resistance in that fear of the unknown. and low enthusiasm for the sheer effort. Now, this is incredibly disappointing. But if you understand, the 80-20 principle as it applies to people devoted to excellence in relationship, 20% of the people are way more interested in quality relationship than the other 80% and have more skills. But if you understand that, then you understand that locating those people is going to be important. And I think really that's the key thing to understand. Perhaps another thing to be aware of is that every human at any given moment has a mix of the four brains in their operating system. So the reptilian brain is fed blood, or its equivalent, based on the amount of trauma and fear in a person's life. So trauma is fear that gets locked in the body and either gets resolved or becomes complex PTSD or PTSD, meaning it's not resolved. There is a fear in the body. From the moment that trauma occurs and doesn't get resolved, that is waiting for that to happen again, that's looking around, wondering when it's going to be them again, right? So that amount of terror, that amount of trauma, it lives in the body. And the more of it that is there, the more energy goes to the reptilian brain. Now, this is important when it comes to relationship, because first of all, the reptilian brain is incapable of empathy. It deals in the law of mass, it deals in fear, and it deals in power, manipulation, coercion, right? It is a fear-based operating system with fight, flight, and freeze or ass licking. So fight, flight, freeze, and please. Animals, crocodiles, don't have the pleaser in them. But human beings, when they are frightened around survival, will often ally themselves with a powerful person and prostitute themselves, basically, and say, what do I have to do so that you'll protect me? So fight, flight, freeze, and please are the protocols of the reptilian brain in relationship. Now, you fight and dominate if you're bigger and can win. You run if you're smaller and will lose. You freeze if neither of those paths are expedient. And you ass lick or try and please if that opportunity seems fruitful. So that's what's driving the relationship. So if a reptile looks at you, the reptilian operating system, they're looking at, can I use them to get rank, to get more power? It's a power brain. Can I use them to look good and get rank and power? Oh, I can't use you? I have no use for you, right? It's pure sociopathic. Will you hurt me, right? Do you have more power than me in a way that might hurt me? Then they'll run away, right? Or they'll freeze and wait for you to do the work, or it'll be something expedient, basically, though. It's not about love and well-being. It's about power and functionality. And usury, betrayal, lies, deception, that is all reptilian, and it is to be expected, right? So you have to understand how much of your partner's reptile is engaged, right? And are they looking at you, right? Because a reptile cannot conceive of human love. It doesn't trust it because it can't feel it, right? So someone who is in a reptilian state, if you come to them with empathy, you are either someone who is weak that they can use and manipulate because you're dumb, right? You believe them, you have some trust and empathy, right? So that can be used, right? And that is viewed as a weakness to be exploited by a reptile, by a sociopath. Or they don't find it attractive if you're vulnerable and have needs or are transparent, right? So a reptile respects, like if you're a reptile, you will look at something like The Art of War by Lao Tzu and say, well, that's the ultimate reptile, right? No, or the 48 Laws of Power, right? That's reptilian dynamics, right? And so if someone gives up their cards, they're dumb from a reptilian perspective. They're not to be admired. That would be human, right? To a reptile, that's dumb. So the first thing you need to do is, first of all, understand that a lot of people have been severely traumatized and are effectively reptiles when they come into the area of relationship. Now, because a reptile cannot feel empathy, cannot feel love as a human being, the gentleness of sexuality is repulsive and confusing to a reptile, right? So a reptile wants to dominate or be dominated sexually, right? And so, one of the things you need to understand is this culture is not kind to women. It has induced a large percentage of men and women into a reptilian state, at least some of the time. And so sensitivity, gentleness, etc., it doesn't connect to the reptilian brain. It will not arouse a reptile. Only dominance, right? You look at something like 50 Shades of Grey or whatever. Right? The arousal is coming from the chase and the pursuit. It's not from caring or kindness or love, right? And so once you've conquered, you have no interest in the prey, right? Because it was never about love. It was about the chase and honing one's hunting skill. So naturally, right, there's two parts of this, right? You do have reptilian traumatized areas, right? And so there is an arousal pattern available, right, around dominance and submission. You also have, right, and what's interesting to you is the human caring and connection, loving enough to care, caring enough to take time, right? Because there's all kinds of people, I really, really care, I just don't have any time to express that care, right? Which is kind of a low level of love. But loving enough to care, caring enough to take time, taking enough time to see clearly, seeing clearly enough to understand deeply, understanding deeply enough to empathize fully, and empathizing fully enough to let it matter, to change, to honor, to attune, to respond to the other person where they are, and doing that successfully enough to facilitate their own survival, security, sense of love and belonging, sense of self-esteem, developing their gifts and abilities, bringing those abilities abundantly into the world, and serving something, becoming something greater than themselves, than the human ego. Right? That's adult love, and a reptile is completely incapable of it. A rational reptile is also incapable of it, right? So there's a tremendous amount of these two drives. I would say 80% of relational dynamics and energy are some mix of rationality and reptilian. Now, the upper levels of the rational reptile you could call enlightened self-interest. I'm not going to rape you, even though that would be fine with me. I'm not going to rape you because there could be fingerprints, DNA. If I murdered you, well, then, it could be traced back to me. Maybe you'd tell you'd tell your friends and my status goes down. So I'm going to do the right thing, right? I'm going to be polite. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to do the thing that makes me look good and doesn't make me look bad, because that's in my interest. If I want to do business with your friends and do this, and I'm not going to tell you that I'm sleeping with your best friend, because then it will make me look bad. I'll have to move out of the house, and so I'm going to, do a secret there, and I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to just leave when I see that you can no longer be useful to me, because then you might not be useful to me right now. So I'm going to wait on that. I'm going to fudge that issue. I'm going to pretend to be. I'm going to, do as little as I can, right, in this area, in this, but I'm not going to, I'm going to think about what's good long-term for my self-interest, right? I hate you. I never want to see you again. But your father might invest in my fund, right? So I'm going to have a good closing, etc., and maybe even feel out, will he make an investment, or something, or hint this or that, and I'll do what's in my interest, basically, right? And so, so that's the rational reptile. So it's polite because it greases relationships. It does the right thing when people are looking, because that's good for business, right? It isn't openly racist because I might lose, someone might write a negative press article or something. It wouldn't be, so I'll only be racist behind closed doors. And so you have the rational reptile. And the rational reptile may say, I feel aroused. I want to be dominated by this person. I mean, this is an interesting kind of language, like when women have said to us, you can do anything you want with me, right? So they're basically saying, I vetted you enough that I would enjoy being dominated, take me, etc., because you have some rank, or you've shown that you have enough power to earn my respect. And often, a reptilian chauvinist female, right, a female animal, will have complete contempt, right? This is the contempt for a male that can't outwit me, can't outsmart me, can't dominate me. So the Bond movies, right, where the female will have sex with Bond if he avoids getting killed by her, basically. So you have a reptile, and then people say, oh, that's really hot. It is to a reptile, and that's really smart. It's cold, and it's smart. It's cool, right? That's the rational reptile, right? Cool femme fatale, right? I only want to fuck someone who can get the better of me sometime, and the more smart she is, the more I want to fuck her. I don't want to. If someone's trusting, kind, innocent, contempt from the reptilian brain. So, this is a very traumatic culture. So 80%, right, of the cultural energy is in that domain. right? I feel disgust for my boss, but if I say I feel disgust for my boss, they'll fire me. So I smile out of enlightened self-interest, right? I put on a performance. I deceive the boss. Or even if they know I hate them, right? As long as I'm willing to submit and pretend and do what I'm told, then the hate, they have contempt for me, I have contempt for them, but we go through the motions. I get a paycheck. I could give a shit about them or the customer. They could give a shit about me. It's enlightened self-interest in a nice veneer of professionalism. And, many people in relationship, right? I hate, I feel contempt, but I'm going to look bad if I'm single. I can always cheat on them if necessary, right? I can't find anything better, so, I'll put up with it, right? So you've got that. Then you have the human, the empathy, right? And you can have unintelligent or irrational empathy, or you can have highly rational empathy, right? So the rationality goes both ways. You can be a rational reptile or you can be a rational human. The rational human says, oh, I care so much about this little baby. Okay, do you care enough to learn about competent parenting? Right? No, not that much. I just love this baby, right? So you're an irrational empath, right? You don't care enough to learn how to have a water birth. You don't care enough to learn about intergenerational trauma and avoid passing it on. You don't care enough to vet your lover by actually reading a book that would tell you how good of a father they're likely to be, right? That's real empathy, when you care enough to see clearly and then make data-based decisions that improve the odds of sustainable well-being. That's love. Do you care enough to love rationally, right? Because if you really love your lover, you don't ask them to unbuckle their seatbelt at 80 miles an hour and give them a blowjob on a crowded highway, right? That's lust. That's adrenaline. That's reptile. But if you really love someone, you don't decrease the odds of a safe arrival by 50%. Oh, but we didn't get in an accident. Yeah. But if you do that 1,000 times, you'll get into several accidents, right? Because you're playing with statistics. You're playing with the odds, right? Do you want to play, 10,000 to 1, you arrive safely? Or do you want to play 1 in 30, you arrive safe, or 29 out of 30, you arrive safely, right? Is it about adrenaline? I want the rush, right? Who cares if we arrive safely? I want the rush, right? It's an addiction. So, and then we have the transcendent love, right? Now, very, very little love is transcendent love, right? So I love you completely. Well, as a matter of fact, what would make me the happiest would be to have a little space right now and focus on my writing. You can't do that. I love you so much. Okay. I think what you mean is you desire me in a way that would gratify you, whether I like it or not, i.e., I have the love of need, the love of desire. And who cares what's best for you and your well-being? It's a self-centered child or adolescent love, right? That's not transcendent love. I love you so much, I can't bear to see you with that other woman. I think you mean you are attached so much to your picture of us that you don't want me to be happy if it deviates from that picture at all. Right? Transcendent love is, first of all, about loving everything. Oh, I love you unconditionally, but I hate them. So the very big condition there is, I love you on condition that you're the version of you that I think you are. Because if you become more like them, I will hate you. That's not unconditional love. And certainly not transcendent love. Right? I love you completely. No. Right? You love on the condition that you're the way I think you are and that you do what I think you will do. And if you don't do that, then I will despise you for ruining my plan. Right? Why do so many lovers kill one another in fits of passion and jealous rage? Right? I may be 100% attached. I may prefer to die than to let you go and enjoy your life in the way that you want to do, right? It's just, that's not an adult version of love, and it's certainly not transcendent. So transcendent love is the love for all things. And the wish for your and everyone else's well-being, whether it's with this person and that, and yesterday, tomorrow, next year, the wish for love and well-being of all things. Of all things. Right? I love you unconditionally, but I hate Hitler. I hate him. Right? So you love me on condition that I'm not at all like Hitler. That's a pretty big condition, right? Hitler was a human being. Right? I'm a human being. We all have a possibility field. Right? I love you on condition that you keep doing what you're doing now. Right? Don't do anything else, or I'll hate you. Right? So transcendent love, is less than 1% of the population, less than 1% of the time is loving transcendently. But it is, of course, this is the realm of the deities. It is the potential of every human being to enter an ecstatic, outside of the static, outside of the status quo, the ecstatic, and find something so beautiful, so true, so good, it makes the world more beautiful. I love the world. I love all of me and all of life, right? That ecstasy. Right? And you can't possess ecstasy. You can't control ecstasy. If you want your partner to have ecstasy, you can't, but don't leave me, don't do this, don't do that, don't meditate too much, you might change, right? No. And if you want an ecstatic partner, they must be free to explore their joy and their ecstasy, right? So if you understand that, what most people are referring to as a romantic relationship is a dominance, submission, power dynamic that is familiar, has something to do with their family system, right? That has a strong lust component, and that the rational brain says, you're cool, that's all right, you're a good person, or doesn't say it's terrible, but for some reason I just love being abused over and over again, right? And then there may be a bit of empathy in there too, right? Oh, sweetie, right? Did you bang your head when you were trying to hit me? Oh, I'm so sorry, right? So there's a little bit of empathy, right? That comes in a strongly, dynamic sociopathic relationship that is, that the culture sanctions, that says that's a good person to marry, like they've got money, so it's rational, it's cold, it's not a lot of real empathy, and it's more like, what should I do? What's the right thing to do here, says the rational brain. There's no feeling about I really love this person, and I feel like this is the best way to express that empathy and love. And so if you as an empath love someone else in their, like you've got these different brains, right? If you have empathy for their reptilian brain, the reptilian brain is incapable of reciprocating that. So that's a lonely relationship, right? If your rationality has a different design, right? Your rationality says, go like this, and their rationality says this is the normal way of doing things, then even though you're both trying to engage rationally, the pattern isn't going to match up. They don't have a loading dock to support you, right? And even if they say, well, that sounds good, if it's too unfamiliar, not of their family, if it takes them too much into the unknown, they may say, I'd love to do that, but I just freak out. Why? Because it's taking me too close to the unknown. And I'm frightened of being out of control there. Or it's too different and my friends will judge you and I don't want to be judged, so I'm afraid of the sociopathic nature of my family. Right? That's a big one, right? I have a sociopathic mother who's racist. Right? I was in Thailand one time and a woman said, I can't introduce you to my mother because she hates Americans. Okay, so let's not visit your mother. No. I've got to go and visit my mother. Okay, well, we'll meet now. No, you can't be in my town because other people will gossip and tell my mother, right? So you hide in a corner, right? And I'll go and lie and pretend you don't exist, right? And then I'll come and this will be a covert relationship. Meaning, in other words, I'm afraid of the reptilian nature of my family, right? Rational reptiles. And so I don't want to deal with that. So you be buried over here, right? So, that obviously that wasn't a lot of fun. So that was the end of that, relationship. But these are the operating systems that are available. And people might be very kind and empathic, for example, when they're on vacation, because no one's judging them. But then you go to meet their family and they're like, don't do that. Don't wear a different jacket. Don't do that. And it's like, wait a minute, I can't be myself? No, I've switched from being an empathic person who accepts you to being a fear-based person who knows that my family is sociopathic and filled with all kinds of, absurd judgments. And I don't want to be beaten up by them. And so you've got to be controlled by my parents' judgments so that I don't get beaten up or your history, right? Because I don't really care about our empathic love as much as I care about avoiding criticism from the abuser in my family, whoever that is, right? Or they'll write me out of the will, right? And I'd rather lose our love than lose what? My source of security, right? So we're dealing with reptilian. The rational and reptilian brain are dealing about security and survival issues. Social survival, financial survival, physical survival, right? I can't date you because my family would throw me out, and then what would happen, right? So these are the reptilian brain's concerns, right? And they have to be addressed, or you don't get to open up into the empathic territory, or you have to find someone who has their own independent survival, security, and love and belonging, and doesn't really care about what anyone else thinks. That's, of course, the ideal. I love you. I see you. I take the time to love you and see you. I want you to be happy and experience well-being. Doesn't really matter what my parents think or feel. That's the way it is. And I'm going to be a human being with you, taking the time to see you and focus on your well-being, and also tend to my own, right? But that we're dealing with probably 5% of the population that has that capacity, right? And 80% of the population is dealing with a fair amount of trauma, right? And so this is the territory. And it's not black and white, right? You can love someone enough to understand while not being willing to be hidden, right? You can say, I understand you depend on your mother for affection. You don't want to upset her. She's a racist sociopath in that area. And you'd like me to hide to fit into that little box. I completely understand why you want that. Would be no doubt very nice for you and your mother, very comfortable for you both, but not very nice for me, right? And so all the best, right? Or you can even say, you know what, I can do that. I love myself. I don't need to have this or that, tied in, right? I'm not going to make you my main relationship, right? Because there's plenty of other people capable of a little bit more room in their life for me. But, we can be friends when you're away from your mother sometime, right? And grow, etc. So these are, I think this is a good vocabulary of things to be mindful of. And good luck, Dane, on this journey.